By talking about all that's happening in Trinidad and Tobago with the state of emergency that was announced last week. This morning, I have the privilege of chatting online with former Police Commissioner Gary Griffith. Good morning and welcome.
Hi, good morning to you and to your many viewers. Always my pleasure.
Good morning. Now, it's always a pleasure to sit with you and, get a bit of your expertise on the topic. This morning, we are chatting to you in your capacity as former Commissioner of Police. And recently, you came out stating that, you saw not necessarily a breach of protocol, but a failure to acknowledge the protocols where the announcement of a state of emergency is concerned. And, it raised a high level of concern as it pertains to the leadership and the management of the TTPS. For those who have not heard, some of your commentary or your comments on the topic, give us an overview of where you sit as it pertains to the announcement of this recent S.O.E.
Sure. So to summarize as quickly as possible, unfortunately, arguably half the country will support it and half will not support it based on their which side of the political fence you're on. I wish and plead to the country, as citizens of this great country, stop just making decisions based on what you feel your political leaders would prefer. Look at it from a logical perspective. My personal views, as I said, I continue to say is I do not see a state of emergency as being used as a crime fighting tool. You can water it down, you can diminish it too much. And all of the things that are taking place right now could have been achieved by the police. This is what I did. There were 3 or 4 occasions when there was an escalation in the threat assessments, and we did everything that was required without a proclamation from the president. Everything that the police is boasting about being done. Why do you need the government and the president to automatically tell you, hey, it's a state of emergency, to wake up now, get out of your slumber and do your job? No, you maximize the force, you increase operations, you increase high visibility, you increase different systems for tactics appreciation, intelligence gathering, we're bringing in the defense force. That all of these things could be done without the state of emergency. That is my personal view. If it is that the prime minister, her style is different to mine. She's one that shoots from the hip immediately. She sees the S.O.E as probably as an avenue to minimize the problem that is taking place, and good for her. What we need to do now is all support the S.O.E, and instead of us criticizing it, it has already been decided, and we go with it and provide the support for the police. What is unacceptable is the process by how it was conducted, and not by the government, but by the Commissioner of Police. One, he decided to send a recommendation he made a media release recommending an S.O.E to the government without the government approving it. He's fast and out of place in local parlance. You can't do a media release to recommend an S.O.E and the government, he didn't even yet approve it. Suppose the government said no, and then you put everybody in confusion. So you make a recommendation because you feel you can't control the security of the country, and the government said no. So he had no right to have done a media release making a recommendation before the government approved. 2, he then went and had a press conference before the government. S.O.E is not a police thing. It is something that is nationwide. In all S.O.Es you would have seen, it's either the Prime Minister, the Attorney General, the Minister of National Security will chair the media conference with the support of the Commissioner of Police and whoever. 3, he decided to, and he boasted about it, that he took the information and went straight to the Prime Minister and bypassed his own line minister, that being the Minister of Homeland Security. And 4, the most damning of all, you decided as a Commissioner of Police to lay out information that was so sensitive. You didn't have to go into detail. All that is required as a commissioner, there's a clear and present danger of certain matters of national security concerns that we believe an S.O.E is recommended to ensure the safety and security of citizens in this country. Full stop. You need to go into the details of prisoners having access to phones and prisoners wanting to put hits on public officials and police officers. All that you have done is you have put undue panic throughout the country. You've affected trade, investment, tourism, revenue into the economy. Who will want to come to Trinidad and Tobago based on a commissioner saying that it was not required? And then what makes it worse, yesterday, when people are asking these questions, he has the bold-faced audacity to tell the public, to tell opposition members, to tell activists, to tell people on social media, to tell civilians, you are a civilian, you were never trained as a police officer, you're fast and out of place to ask me anything. That is the height of arrogance. Now, if it is that persons criticize you, they condemn you, they smear your name, they tarnish your character, it is your right to defend it with facts, with data to justify, which is what I did as Commissioner of Police. If person said, you're only arresting certain persons, and I'll say that is a lie. Look at the number of people we arrested at Residence nightclub or whatever. If people say, why are you questioning the Prime Minister's decision, why you didn't arrest people in Bayside, I'll say because we couldn't arrest persons because it was a public health regulation, so we couldn't arrest people in their private property. You have to explain and justify the reason for your action. But as a commissioner of police, for you to make a statement, none of you all ever arrested anyone, none of you all were ever in court, so you all fasten out a place to challenge me and question what I do. That is the level of what we have now as a commissioner of police. And it goes right back to my concern when commissioners are now being selected by civilians who are in the Police Service Commission, who are not trained, qualified in any form of fashion in law enforcement. And it just takes one person in the Police Service Commission to like somebody, and all of a sudden that person becomes commissioner. He needs to check himself and realize that you are going to be attacked on a regular basis, but your defense must be to give data and justification for your action, not telling people, well, you was never a police, so shut up and let me do my job.
Understood. And I'm glad that you brought up the issue of the details being made public, right? Do you think there's a way in which the TTPS could have handled those public or those threats to public officers without it being publicized based on the economic impact that now has?
Yeah, definitely. All that was required in a state of emergency, a part of the element of surprise. You don't allow the enemy to know exactly what they're game. They know what you know. They know that also. So you know that we are in prison and we are trying to get information out and whatever. And you've made it known now to the enemy. But apart from that, there's no need for the public to be aware. There's some, it's a need to know basis. So by going out of your way, it seemed that he tried to protest too much to justify the SOE. It was not required. You just have to say there's a clear and present danger. There was a concern of certain matters that can affect national security, and we believe that it is warranted that we have the SOE. And the only difference with the SOE that could be done without the SOE is it allows you to break into houses without a warrant and to arrest persons indefinitely. Other than that, thing that is being done now could have been done with the SOE. And that is a determining factor because, as I said, I did it. It is known as a national security alert state. It's a color-coded assessment based on the threat, and you lift it up from green to amber to red to black based on the threat. You intensify your patrols, your police officers, take persons off leave, make sure you work more in a greater manner with the defense force. All of these things could be done, and he could have said all of these things are taking place. But to go out of your way to specify, it was not required. But it goes right back to the importance of us making sure there's a proper assessment done when we select a commissioner of police.
Right, and we see a situation where, persons say, put them behind bars, send them to some life person, the death. A situation where even those high-risk criminals that are already behind bars are now being exposed as being a serious threat to Trinidad and Tobago's safety and security. What needs to be done to deal with these high-risk criminals if the solution is to put them in prison, but even behind bars, they're still causing mayhem?
Good question. And two things on that. That is why I drafted the Ministry of Justice for Kamala Persad-Bissessy in 2010. I spent weeks and weeks, if not months, before 2010 general election to draft the Ministry of Justice for her. When it was implemented, the two ministers didn't have a clue. They did nothing as it pertained to that Ministry of Justice. I drafted the Ministry of Justice specifically for this reason. And unfortunately, the present minister, he has not said a word. The Ministry of Justice was drafted to put everything that involves in the prison, the criminal justice system, into that ministry to deal with the number of issues we have with the criminal justice system, from persons being in remand for a longer period than the maximum sentence had they been found guilty, to persons when they go into prison, they become a more hardened criminal because instead of proper rehabilitation, we have a higher rate of recidivism. The situation with almost 80% of police officers being absent from court and cause persons to escape. And then also the big one, obviously, and many other things, but also the big one, prisoners having easy access to communicate and continue to run their racket whilst in prison. That was the drafting of the Ministry of Justice. Unfortunately, it seems that they shifted prisons back to the Ministry of Homeland Security, which means people are asking, well, what is the reason for the Ministry of Justice? That Ministry of Justice will deal with all of these issues. You need a ministry by itself to clean up the many irregularities we have in the criminal justice system, inclusive of the prisons. And then as it pertains to an operational perspective, I had the exact situation as Commissioner of Police. Prisoners were involved in calling hits on persons on the outside, including public officials. I didn't run to the government and start to cry as a commissioner and say, oh, it's too much for me. I want a state of emergency because I can't deal with it. No, I analyzed the situation. I did a combat appreciation, and I looked at what was required. And instead of taking the prisoners and sending them to an army camp to have a Guantanamo Bay in Trinidad and Tobago, what I did instead was I looked at a specific wing in Golden Grove. I used TTPS funds, refurbished it, put cameras at every single angle, inclusive of 3 different elements in every cell, monitored everything, had the police, the army, and private security, and the prisons have a commands to see everything that takes place 24 in that wing. Then have a 3-layered security approach of 2 soldiers, 10 feet later, 2 police officers, 10 feet later, 2 prison officers. So if a matchstick has to enter into those cells, it must go through 3 layers. And if anything is leaving, it must go out through those 3 layers. That prevented the presence of one rogue element in the prison as a prison officer sending a cell phone or a message from the prisoner out into the public. That is how I would have dealt with it. That is how it was dealt with, and it was everything was shut down. That is when we started seeing the highest reduction in violent crime in 17 years, because we put a lockdown of the problem without having to turn, as I said, Tetron barracks into a Guantanamo Bay and then call in a state of emergency. That is my take on it. If persons have a difference in opinion because you want to, this is not attacking the government. This is the Commissioner of Police making the recommendation. Government. So this is not the government's fault. This, again, it goes back to the importance of a commissioner of police having the tactical ability. Sometimes if you spend 27 years behind a desk in special branch, you might not be able to be operationally, have that operational ability to understand these things. So as soon as you see your problem, you will, if there's too much traffic, you will run to a government and keep calling for a state of emergency. This was a commissioner's recommendation, and the government was left with no choice. The commissioner now must bear responsibility for it. My take on it, as I said, I had the exact situation with the exact prisoners, and it was dealt with in a proper manner without removing the prisoners and calling for a state of emergency.
Right. And have you taken the time to write to this new administration requesting that some of those, key strategies that you utilized during your time be reinstated to ensure Trinidad and Tobago stability as it pertains to security?
Yeah, definitely. I'm a team player. I'm a patriot of Team Trinidad and Tobago. I did the same thing when Keith Rowley was the Prime Minister. I said, look, I'm not a member of your political party, but I think I had a measured degree of success as a Minister of National Security and a Commissioner of Police. I believe I can assist you in giving free advice. And he said, basically, I don't care about you. I don't need your support. You're not a PNM. That is the arrogance of Keith Rowley, and his whole political party paid the price for that type of arrogance. It is hoped and expected that this government does not do the same thing, because this was the same Prime Minister now when she said just a few months before the election that Gary Griffith was the best commissioner the country ever had. She was the one that was insisting that I accompany her when we were going to have the anti-crime talks with the PNM government. So I have sent numerous messages. There's been no response, and that is their right. If it is they feel that we only want to work with people who have a UNC party card, I am hoping that there's a greater degree of maturity by this administration than what would have been seen by the Rowley administration. You're not one of us, so I don't want your help. And the country paid the price for it from a national security perspective. I know, as I said, I drafted the Ministry of Justice, I drafted the Ministry of Defense, I drafted the Ministry of Home Affairs, which they now call Homeland Security. I did all the research, and I can assure the country that if these 3 ministries are properly implemented with the type of procedure and policies, we will be able to put a stranglehold and deal with the problems of security in this country. But I have offered it, I have sent it. But sometimes you see arrogance. Even this Commissioner of Police, he has actually blocked me. How you can be a Commissioner of Police and you decide to block a previous Commissioner of Police? That is pettiness, it's his immaturity, but it says a lot about persons who get in position. The most dangerous thing is for an ignorant person to have authority. Because if you feel like you don't want to speak to anyone, when I was commissioner or minister, I didn't care who you were. That's why I foolishly sent a message to the whole country. If you have any concern or recommendation, contact me directly as the Commissioner of Police. That is what you need to be. Make yourself accessible. But to have persons who are now ministers blocking people, refusing to meet with them, refusing to communicate with them, refusing to take advice, you do not want to believe that this is an animal farm.
Understood. And even as you touched on the matter of political interference and how political ideologies can cloud persons' judgment. What can be done to ensure that persons see beyond just their political affiliation? That, okay, I support this administration. This administration has called an S.O.E. through the Commissioner of Police. I support it because I support this administration. What is needed for persons to look beyond that political loyalty and really see that this threat to Trinidad and Tobago's security is a serious one, and that the persons who are capable of presenting ideas and solutions should be considered.
Well, it is a degree of maturity. That is the word. But sometimes we are so immature. When there'll be 1/3 of the country, regardless of what a UNC tell her, my political leader can do what she wants. I am going to support her. I will find a justification for what she did. 1/3 of the country has the same thing with the PNM, and then there'll probably be 1/3 of those persons with some degree of impartiality, independent thinkers. Those persons who decide the outcome of an election. The majority of those decided that regardless of what, that PNM has to go because they have passed that threshold of being logical. They've become arrogant. They've become dictatorial. What we do not want is for this government to ever reach to that threshold of doing exactly why it's, because then it just becomes a recurring situation every 5 years to keep changing because it's always going to be two major political parties. There's never going to be a need for a third party that can get anywhere. You're not even going to get a deposit. And there's nothing wrong with that because there are two very powerful parties who have done so much towards the development of Trinidad and Tobago. And they have made mistakes because the people who lead the parties are human. But it is that citizens must, instead of just being bitter and angry, if at any time you perceive that someone is saying something that might not be in support of your political party, you just blindly want to support. I can tell you, if you look on social media, I have been on about 15 different interviews by the media who have contacted me. I don't contact the media. And the comments I get, there's not one thing that person could say it that could question my logic. So what they do is they immediately get nasty. They get bitter. Why don't shut up, Gary? Why don't go on vacation? You're not one of we. You lose the. When you hear those comments, absolutely nothing of logic to state, well, what you're saying is incorrect, because they can't question the message, so they attack the messenger. That is when you are the blind loyalist, and it goes on both sides. If Gary Griffith tomorrow becomes the Minister of National Security or Commissioner of Police, those same people attacking me will be praising me, and this is unbelievable. So it is not based on the individual; it's based on the appointment and whether they are political leaders like you or not. Citizens, be a little more mature. What we are doing, certain persons with experience in certain fields, finance, energy, health, national security, if we are giving you information, it is for you to take it, absorb it, and you come to an informed decision rather than his comments make sense, but it's affecting my political party, so I'll just attack him. It doesn't help you. It doesn't help the country. My job is to serve the country as a soldier, as a politician, as a police officer. I can give free advice. I'm not here. I don't need a job. I don't need a position. But I know very well what can be done to improve the standard of living in Trinidad and Tobago, especially as it pertains to security. If this government is willing to be mature in contrast to what the last government was, I'm a phone call away.
Right. And, you explained this current S.O.E. to be somewhat of an overkill, highlighting other strategies that could have been used as opposed to going straight to a state of emergency, and particularly some of those that you had implemented during your time as Commissioner of Police. Do you think that same level of maturity is the reason why the current Commissioner of Police and leadership of the TTPS did not tap into some of those strategies that you deem to have been effective during your time in office?
Well, it could be that, or the individual who now holds the office. We do have to understand that he spent most of his time behind a desk. He never really was involved in any type of operations. The reason why I had measured success in my period as Commissioner of Police, because we were smack in the middle of a situation where police services all over the world were being annihilated, they were being despised, they were being ridiculed of how they were operating, because COVID was conflict between the police and citizens. Because of my military training, that was the right time to have a Commissioner of Police with that type of leadership to be able to deal with operations, to deal with tactics, to deal with intelligence-driven policing. I had that ability. This present commissioner I think he ever probably, I mean, the poor guy, even wearing a camouflage uniform, he doesn't even know how to put up his sleeves. He puts on a skull on his as an emblem, not understanding you put on these things, it's supposed to be a representation of something you're certified in or something you represented, whether it was a training session or something. He doesn't know what tactical, he's not operational. He's very administrative from intelligence gathering in special branch. He spent 95% of his police career behind a desk in special branch. So he may not have that. There's nothing wrong with this. I'm not criticizing because Gary Griffith, I have very little training in law. But what I did is I brought qualified attorneys to help me as commissioner of police to deal with my shortcomings. He has shortcomings as well. And instead of just his shortcoming, instead of trying to get experts that are operational and tactical that would have been able to tell him, when we had the same situation with Gary, this is what we did. Bam, we had an alert state. Bam, we put our wing inside there. Bam, we brought in the army. And so you brought the army into the prison rather than take the prisoners out to court in an army camp. He doesn't have those advisors. He doesn't have that advice, have the training. So first reaction is knee-jerk, call a state of emergency, and send the prisoners to Guantanamo Bay. When he did that, what he has done is virtually surrendered to the criminals to tell the prisoners, you have won, we cannot secure you in our nation's prisons, which is where they're supposed to be, and the police don't have the ability to support the prisons, so we have to go to the army. That signifies defeat. That was my take on it. So he needs to appreciate the fact, that he needs to be open and be willing to understand you don't know everything, you have shortcomings, as I did, and have experts around you to assist you to minimize those shortcomings.
Excellent. And we're going to take a quick break right here, and we'll be back with much more on this conversation right after this. So see you soon.